So going to pray to St. Lucy as usual. So.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. O St. Lucy, you prefer to let your eyes be torn out rather than denying the faith and defiling your soul. And God, through an extraordinary miracle, replaced them with another pair of sound and perfect eyes to reward your virtue and faith, appointing you as the protector against eye diseases. I come to you for you to protect my eyesight and to heal the illness in my eyes. O St. Lucy, preserve the light of my eyes, so that I may see the beauties of creation, the glow of the sun, the colour of the flowers, and the smile of children. Preserve also the eyes of my soul, the faith through which I can know my God, understand his teachings, recognise his love for me, and never miss the road that leads me to where you, St. Lucy, can be found in the company of the angels and saints. St. Lucy, protect my eyes and preserve my faith. Amen.
Amen. Right, so welcome to this session of the Barocci Group. So this month I've been a little bit naughty because the topic I've chosen hasn't got a direct connection with religion as such. So we're talking about a religious painter. He was a religious man. He was very devoted to his family, and he did some religious paintings at the beginning of his career. But I thought it was a good topic for summer because it's all about light, it's all about Valencia, it's all about that beautiful Valencian sun and light and colour. And also this year, 2023, is the centenary of his death. So I thought that would be appropriate. And, you know, I'm Spanish, so I'm allowed to do this. So here we go. So you may or may not have heard of Sorolla, but the importance of him is, and of his paintings, of his art, is due to different reasons. So one is that he was one of the most internationally successful Spanish painters during his lifetime. And this was something that didn't happen that often. For example, like Velázquez is very well known now, but during his lifetime he wasn't internationally renowned. But if you think of someone like Picasso, for example, he was very famous in life, so Sorolla was the same. And he was definitely the most internationally recognized of his time, of the Spanish painters of his time. Also, his observation of reality is very personal and very sort of deep. He has this deeply penetrating gaze. I mean, if you look at his gaze in the portrait, you can already tell that he was a good observer. He was very interested in photography. Photography was an art that was developing at the time. And we will see later, but his father-in-law was a very famous photographer. So that will feed into his painting. So his style is very personal. It's a perfect balance, really, between tradition, mainly because of figurative painting. So he's not an abstract painter. He doesn't tend towards abstraction, and also because he takes on board something that's called costumbrismo. This comes from costumbre, from custom. We will see exactly what it is a bit later. So it's a perfect balance between that Spanish tradition and also modernity. So it's that light and color technique that is very personal to him. And on the other hand, he also sort of reinterprets Velázquez's brushstroke. So he takes a lot from Velázquez, but he sort of transforms it to make it his own. Also, he paints outside, so we will see a lot of light effects and color, but we can't label him. He doesn't belong to a specific denomination or movement. And if you take anything from this session, he wasn't an impressionist. He's been labeled as the biggest of Spanish impressionists. He wasn't an impressionist. He does take influence from the impressionists. He was very well aware of what they were doing, and he definitely used their technique sometimes, but he wasn't one of them. And he combines genres, and we will see this with some examples in a very personal way again. And it would have been really interesting to see how his style would have evolved, because he had some late influences from the first avant-garde movements, especially from Fauve, or Fauvism. And he died quite young. He died at 60. So who knows what would have happened? Maybe he would have tended towards abstraction in the end, which is really what happens with most artists. Like I was discussing this with my mom, how interesting it is that even Velázquez, you see his latest paintings and you think gosh, everything tends towards that abstraction, doesn't it? But anyway, we won't go into that. So I'll give you examples in a minute, but so we're going to be going through his life and I'll give you some examples of what each period. So he was born in Valencia, but his parents died when he was 2. His mother died of cholera. There was an epidemic of cholera in Valencia, and his father died of grief. So it's a very, very sad start of his childhood. But he was adopted by his aunt and uncle, and they encouraged him to pursue the artistic career. And that was the founding stone of his career, of his painting, the fact that he had his family around him. So he had both a tragic and happy childhood, and that made him a family man since the beginning. And throughout his life, his family would be his rock, basically. He had huge influence of the sea, the east coast of Spain, especially Valencia, all that landscape in his art, as we will see. And he went to the School of Fine Arts in Valencia, and there he met Juan Antonio García del Castillo, who was the son of a very renowned photographer, Antonio García Peris, who took this photo and other photos we will see. So those two would be his future brother and father-in-law. So in 1885, he got a scholarship to study in Rome. This was obligatory to become a serious painter. You had to go to Rome, you had to study the classical art and the Italian masters of the Renaissance. And whilst in Rome and in this first sort of period of his career is when he did some religious paintings. So this one is the Atonement of Christ. So what you have at the top on the right is a photograph by a French photographer, a very famous photographer called Jean Laurent. He did lots of photography on art, and it's thanks to him that works of art that have been lost, now we know what they look like. And in this case, this work of art has been almost completely lost, so it's only those 3 fragments that you can see on the right that survive. It was a huge painting, so I've got the dimensions here. So it's 7 meters by 4 meters. That in feet is, I think, 22 feet by 13 feet. So it's pretty big. And it took him almost 3 years to paint it, as he was still studying. And it's something he wouldn't do later in his career again, to spend so much time with one painting, to take figures out, put them back in. He had lots of doubts, he didn't know what to do, he made lots of changes, and he was never satisfied with it. It was like giving birth for him. It was really hard for him to do this painting, and it was a massive failure. So his career started with a big failure, because the critics basically said it was too human, it was too naturalistic, and it was not devout enough. So they said that there was no divinity here, there was only basically a burial, and that was it. And after all that work, after all those doubts, those changes, that affected him deeply, not only personally, emotionally, but also spiritually. So he went to Assisi with his wife, they had just got married, to think and to find a new way for his art. But I think this is partly why he didn't attempt to make big religious paintings again, because he saw it just wasn't his thing. So whilst in Assisi, he did some other religious paintings influenced by the old Italian masters and also Byzantine art. So this is Saint Clotilde, I didn't know the name in English, I just left it as Clotilde. And as you see, it's a little bit, it's almost like he has influence also of symbolism. That's also another movement, 19th century movement. So it's sort of a bit unsettling because we can't see the eyes of the model, but the model actually was his wife, who was called Clotilde. So she was the model for her patron saint, and he would be the model for many other paintings. And then this one as well, like Taking Habit, again, it's very sort of traditional painting, there's nothing that innovative here, apart from the color. And again, it's influenced by symbolism, by the sort of this Byzantine sort of feel to it. So 1888 was the year of love for Joaquín. He got married to Clotilde, who would be his wife, his muse, his companion, and his support during his whole life. Their marriage was incredibly loving and very strong. We have 2,000 letters that they sent to each other every time they were apart, and because he would travel, he would write to his wife like almost every day, at least every week, and she would write back. So it was lovely marriage, lovely relationship that they had. And they had 3 children, Maria, Joaquín, and Elena, and they all followed in his footsteps. So Maria was also a painter, Joaquín did some photography, and he was also the first director of the Sorolla Museum in Madrid, and Elena did some sculpture. So his 2 great passions were his work and his family. And so we've seen that first period is on one hand is devotional paintings, so not religious as in they don't deal with biblical themes, but they do deal with religion, as we'll see. It's mostly religious customs or religious ceremonies, let's say, and these costumbrismos that we've talked about, that I will explain in a second. And that was very popular at the time. So costumbrismo it was a trend in Spanish literature and then in art as well. So it dealt with the everyday manners or customs of a particular social or regional environment, often with like some satire, like with a satirical or philosophical intent. It could be a bit more moralistic or a bit more sort of satire. So he lived in Madrid with his wife and his children, and he did some paintings about these popular devotions. So, for example, he's kissing the relic. So we see already like the virtuosity that he has, like the handling of light, the description of the environment. Always like he's very detailed. Like his attention to detail is really strong, and the capture of the moment, and we'll see this much more strongly later when we will see the influence of photography in his painting, like to the point that they look like spontaneous photographs. And also the representations of like popular types, as in from the people, just normal people going about their lives and their devotions. He starts very early with these marine landscapes that reminds him of his time in Valencia with his aunt and uncle when he was little, and the world of fishermen, sometimes mixing it with devotion. So this is the blessing of the boat. So we see it's very down to earth. You have like really sort of almost scruffy characters. I mean this guy is like right in the foreground of the painting, and we don't even see his whole figure. So he's already sort of playing with this not so traditional perspective, not perspective, but the framing. It's almost like you're on the boat and you're trying to get everyone in the picture with your camera. So, and you just have to leave part of this man out. So he's already experimenting with that. And like the characters, at least for me, they remind me of Caravaggio a little bit, like when he painted devotional paintings or religious paintings with like characters that were really sort of like just popular, just characters from the street, and he was criticized for that as well in his time. And then so on one hand is the costumbrismo, which is this sort of like popular devotions, if you like, or customs, and then social realism, which was very popular at the time. So it was basically dramatic scenes from the lower classes to generate compassion among the higher classes. So it was a bit like, it was denouncing social issues, but with a bit of a paternalistic view. So because, you know, this was for the high classes to say, oh, that's very sad, but really not really doing anything about it, just like being aware that was sad. Okay. So that was apparently, that was very, very popular. And you can see that in the titles are always very dramatic, so with exclamation marks and things. So for example, this is called Another Marguerite, and it's inspired by Goethe, I think, by Margarita in Faust. I think, I don't know much about Faust, but I think it's inspired by a character of Faust, and also apparently in a real life thing that happened. I'm pretty sure it was a woman that had an illegal abortion, and she was jailed for that. So she was being taken to prison on a train. And you can also see, like, the composition is basically based on a really strong diagonal line going to the background. A very similar composition we see here is, I've kept the Spanish title because it's a little bit difficult to translate, but it's basically human trafficking. So you see some young girls here who, like, probably from poor families that have been sort of promised a better life and are taken by this old woman that you see here, dressed in black. She's dressed in black. She has a really big contrast in terms of color with the clothes that the girls are wearing, and she's basically taking them to for prostitution, basically. So again, is that he inspired himself in his own painting. So in the previous ones, you see, like, he's basically the same diagonal line almost. He's just moved this slightly, but he got inspiration from his own painting for the composition. And this is one of his most famous paintings, and they still say fish is expensive. So apparently this was a phrase that was said in some Spanish ports. So, because fish, it was, and it still is, like, expensive, but the meaning of it is like, if you knew the danger that fishermen go through to get you that fish, you would happily pay that price and more for it. So you can see two older fishermen that are attending to this young man who's being wounded, and is the light and shadow can remind us of Velázquez. It always changes a little bit with this light and with the bigger screen, but it's quite a strong contrast of light and shadow. And also the realism of the faces, again, like very sort of scruffy, down-to-earth characters, and the brownish colors, like he's taking from the Spanish Baroque a lot. And we've mentioned the combination of genres as well. So you have the costumbrismo again, so those sort of like habits or customs of just like the regular people, the lower class people. You have the social realism as well, because fishing wasn't a profession that was depicted very often. It was like so low that you wouldn't devote a painting to that. And these are like big paintings as well. Also marine landscape, so this is very characteristic of his painting, although here it's just in the background, but it's there. And again, the very strong contrast of light and shadow. So if you see like that, the back of the boat is almost like white. And for someone who has spent most of her summers in Valencia, I know that light is exactly like that. And it's like, you know, 2 in the afternoon, and the sun is just like so strong, and it's so hot. And then you find refuge like on this tent, on this boat. So again, it's that Spanish tradition that play with light and shadow, and also obviously Caravaggio. Like anywhere where you see the big contrast between light and shadow, that sort of tails back to Caravaggio. He had a big triumph in Paris. He took some of his paintings there, and he had a massive success. This one was bought by the French state, the return from fishing. And again, you see all the things that we've been talking about, the reflection of the light on the sea. You see his brush stroke, especially on the waves, is being much more free. But it's still, as we'll see in a second, but it's still not the brushstroke of the Impressionists, which is much more short. This is more long, it's more sort of calculated, but it's still very, very free, and it takes more after Velázquez than after the Impressionists, really. But you see the strong contrast of light and shadow again. And this one won the Grand Prix, the highest prize in the International Exhibition in Paris in 1900, and also the Medal of Honor in the National Exhibition in 1901 in Spain. So it's a sad inheritance. So it's this, it's basically it's boys from an orphanage that is obviously governed by priests, and most of them have illnesses, and they're just taking them on a trip to the sea. So again, this whole thing about generating compassion to the viewer in the face of a reality that was quite alien to them, that they weren't used to. So and again, he mixes that social realism with the marine landscape. And if you see, he changes the perspective slightly, because if you were taking a picture of this scene, there's no way the horizon would be that high. The horizon would be, I don't know, but it would be maybe more or less about here. So where this white sort of big line is, this wave. So he changes perspective slightly to have a very high horizon and have the sea as his background. And he will repeat this in many of his other marine paintings. So you basically have a different perspective on the background and than on the foreground. But when you see it, it just works. You just don't think about this. That shows that he was a good painter, because he's tricking you. So, like I said, he wasn't an Impressionist. He does have influence of the Impressionists. And that's why I brought you this comparison between Claude Monet, one of the paintings by Claude Monet, and one of his own paintings. And the topic is the same, is their wives. So that's Mrs. Monet and that's Mrs. Sorolla. So he paints a good part of his works outside, like the Impressionists did, to get all the effects of light and therefore of color. And because some of them are really big paintings, he would go every day to the same spot, and he would do all sorts of things. So he would have like really complex structures with ditches and grips to paint with the best light and the best framing. But the main difference is the brushstroke, like I mentioned before. So if you look at the Monet, it's very small brushstroke, it's very swift, and it's very fractured. So the form is really reconstructed in the eye of the viewer when you look at the painting from a distance. So and there is no uniformity of color, but there's something called vibration by proximity. So you have colors that contrast, and that vibration makes it mimics the shimmering of natural light on the objects, and that's why it works in the eye of the viewer. But Sorolla, like you see, he's giving really long brushstrokes, and that comes from Spanish tradition. The figures have a volume, they have a weight that the Monet figures don't have. So the Impressionist figures are much more, so if you want, like, they're lighter, they're very airy, whereas Sorolla's figures have a weight, have a presence. And yeah, he does have very intense colors as well, but he doesn't use that vibration by proximity. He uses just a different approach. And he paints the light in a different way, and that's why he's also been described as a luminist, from lumen, from light. Apparently there is an American movement that's called luminism, so we shouldn't confuse it with that. But that's why he's also been called a painter of light, and quite rightly. But the Impressionists were also painters of light. It's just that it's two different approaches. So he was very aware of the Impressionist technique, and he uses it sometimes. Like, for example, here, you see the very long continuous brushstrokes on the boats, but you see the swift fragmented brushstrokes on the water. So he's aware, he's using it, but he just refuses to be constrained to one movement. He has his own style. He absorbs influences from everywhere, and he just creates his own personal style. This is the one that I had in the first slide. I absolutely love these paintings. Just like, because you can tell so you see the light on the sail that is coming probably through the trellis that's above these people that we don't see, but we know there's a trellis because we see the effects of the light on the people's clothes and on the sail. So I think it's absolutely masterful. Like the way he does it is incredible. So it's all about light with Sorolla. And I brought this because it's also one of my favorite paintings by him, because it's almost all, it's monochrome, almost. It's apart from the faces of the two characters, is his wife, and I think his youngest daughter, Elena. So it's all in white, but really there is no pure white there. It's all shades of yellow, of grey, in different gradations. There's almost no pure white in that painting. And still, when you see it, it's like, wow, that's so much white. So again, it's like, but we are aware of the volume. We are aware that there's a bed, that there is a pillow, that there's a duvet, that there's a wall, but there's almost nothing there to suggest that in terms of drawing. It's the changes in color and light. So he's showing off his technical skills with this. And I'll read you a quote from an article that says, "It is one of the best examples of Sorolla's ability to transmit, through his handling of light and color, intense physical sensations and equally intense moods. The emotion of the father/husband and the gaze of the painter have merged in that filtered light that caresses that whiteness from which the two heads emerge, as if the whole world disappeared before that absorbing intimacy of that moment." So I thought that was a really nice quote. So in 1909, something really big will happen to him, and this is that the founder of the Hispanic Society of America, Mr. Archer M. Huntington, he invited him to exhibit in New York, and he did several exhibitions, and I think it was the second one, or maybe the first one, I'm not sure, I think it was the second one. He had 160,000 visitors in just 1 month. So it was huge success. And later, in 1912, Huntington commissioned 14 massive murals that would be called Vision of Spain, and that would be to decorate the Hispanic Society. That would be his greatest adventure, his greatest challenge, and also it would be his killer, as we will see. So he had a house in Madrid designed by himself, both the house and the gardens, and it was built between 1911 and 1920. And he wanted his place of work to be his house, to be close to his family, so as he couldn't be separated from his family for very long. And actually, this commission for the Hispanic Society meant that he had to go through the different Spanish regions and to do research and to paint and, well, take more than paint, to take drawings, to take lots of notes on what he was seeing, to then do the paintings afterwards. And that meant a lot of time separated from his family, and that took a toll on him emotionally as well as physically. So in 1920, by the time he finished this commission, he had a stroke and he couldn't paint the same way again. So he did some small paintings, but sadly he died only 3 years later. And he died in Madrid, but he was buried in his beloved Valencia. And his funeral was attended by multitudes because he was very well loved and respected. And then his wife left the house and its contents to the Spanish government. So in 1932, the new Sorolla Museum was inaugurated in Madrid. There is another one in Valencia, I think. I haven't been to that one. But his son like I mentioned before, his son Joaquín would be the first director of the museum. So this was the vision of Spain that Huntington commissioned. So I've only brought you a couple of examples because it's 14 huge murals. So Huntington is a really fascinating character. Like, I don't really know that much about him, but I was reading a little bit about him and I thought, there needs to be a film made about his life. Like, it's so trippy, it's so interesting. So by the time he was 20, he already had almost 2,000 books on Spanish art and culture. Like, he was absolutely mad about anything and everything Spanish. But it's funny because he never bought any works in Spain so that he didn't deprive it from its heritage, something that I'm really grateful to him for that. So either he commissioned works like these ones, or he bought Spanish art in other countries, and then he created this museum and library of the Hispanic art, which would become the Hispanic Society. So it only took him 19 years from decision to inauguration. So quite a big chunk of his life. And Sorolla, by the time he commissioned this, he already had 2 exhibitions there. And he also commissioned him to decorate the library with paintings of portraits of illustrious Spanish people, mainly by authors and playwrights, and we'll see some of them. So the vision of Spain is 14 canvases, nearly, I only have the feet here, I don't have the meters, nearly 12 feet tall and 200 feet, this is in combined length, okay, so the combined length of all of them. So they were painted at various locations in Spain, like I said, between 1912 and 1919. So not all the regions of Spain are represented, and this is because Sorolla gave this condition to Huntington that, okay, you want me to paint this, and I think the series was going to be called The Provinces of Spain at first, but then Sorolla said, no, because I don't want to represent Spain as objectively. I want to represent my vision of Spain. You're commissioning me to do this, so I'll do it my way. So he didn't do all the regions. He did a lot of the east, obviously, a lot of the south. It's mainly Andalusia that is represented. I feel like he doesn't really help the stereotype of Spain because some of the northern regions are not represented, and I'm like, no, because there's all lots of flamenco and stuff. Actually, I had a flamenco painting, and then I thought, I'm not going to show them a flamenco painting. You can look for it if you want. I'm showing you the Valencian one because too stereotypical. So that's why some regions are not represented, and others have like 3-4 paintings devoted to them. So this is in Valencia, that's the Valencian flag. For those of you who don't know it, it's one of my favorite flags because it has lots of color in it. So if you have ever seen the Catalonian flag, it's very similar, it's just that it doesn't have the blue bit. It's basically the same, but I like the Valencian one more because it has blue and it's sorry for the Catalan people, just I like this one more, I think it's more pretty. And you see, there is stereotype, obviously, like there's the oranges. You think of Valencia, you think of oranges. But it's true, and I think I'm going to get this opportunity now. I've just thought of this. So I know here, Seville oranges are very popular. So marmalade, Seville orange marmalade. Well, in Spain, nobody eats oranges from Seville. I wasn't aware even that Seville oranges were a thing until I came here. And until a lot of people were like, oh, like you're going back to Spain. So you're going to eat Seville oranges? Like, no, why would I do that? Like, oranges come from Valencia. It's like, no, they come from Seville. No. So I did a bit of research some time ago, and apparently there's this particular variety of orange that from Seville that is quite, it's not as sweet and it's more bitter or sour, and that's why it's used for making marmalade. And here is incredibly popular. So apparently those oranges are almost only used for making marmalade to bring it to the UK. And that's why like it's not a thing that we know in Spain. So yeah, so that's just one of those funny things. But yeah, oranges that we eat in Spain, they come mainly from Valencia because that's where the climate is appropriate for them. And this is another one that I particularly like because of the light. Again, just the contrast of the light is great. This is Ayamonte. This is in Huelva. It's one of the provinces of Andalusia. And we see fishermen pulling huge tuna fish out of the boats before taking them to the market. So that's something that was very traditional, but maybe not so well known. So, for example, flamenco dancing, which he also depicted, that was something that was more familiar for audiences, but this, for example, wouldn't be. So he decided to not only include more stereotypical or more well-known customs, but also customs that weren't that well-known, so to international audiences. So yeah, so there's that intense light. I can almost feel the heat and the sweat of the fishermen just like pulling out those huge fish out of the sea. And it's not when he does this, like if we compare it with his first paintings, with the ones about another Marguerite and those or even the ones about kissing the relic, those more early ones. Those are more anecdotal if you want. This is more realistic. This is very well documented. Like I mentioned, he traveled for years. He made hundreds and hundreds of sketches that have been preserved in the Sorolla Museum. But unfortunately, the physical effort was enormous and it would have its toll on him. So he had a stroke just after a few months of finishing the series. And he considered it his masterpiece, but he wouldn't see it exhibited, and because it wasn't exhibited until 3 years after his death. So that was quite sad. It was exhibited for the first time in Spain, and I remember going to the exhibition. This was on a tour between 2007 and 2010, and it was. I think it received over 2 million visitors, and I think it remains the most visited exhibition in Spain's history. Like I remember going with my parents, and it was at the Prado Museum, and like seeing these huge canvases was sort of like you just didn't have the space to take it all in, to just get back and try and get the whole scene, because they're absolutely massive. These are some of the portraits that he painted for the Hispanic Society, for the library. So these are characters that are very well known to me, maybe not that well known to you. Antonio Machado in the middle, for example, is one of our most famous poets of the 20th century. Aureliano de Beruete was a well-known painter of the 19th century. Emilia Pardo Bazán was a poet and author, a novelist as well, and she was one of those women that had rare success in a men's world as well. So really big names of Spanish, mainly 19th century and 20th century society. So he was, apart from those portraits for the Hispanic Society, Sorolla was one of the most prolific portrait painters of the Spanish 19th century. Everyone wanted to be painted by him. And he painted characters from all professions, from writers like Benito Pérez Galdós, which was also one of the main authors of the time, to actresses like Maria Guerrero in theatre, to singers like Raquel Meller, who was very famous internationally at the time, and scientists as well. So that's neuroscientist and Nobel Prize Santiago Ramón y Cajal. And yeah, so he would do works that were more detailed. For example, earlier, like you see in Galdós, like there's quite a lot of detail on the face, and in Ramón y Cajal as well. Like his face is has all these strength of expression. But if you see the one on Raquel Meyer, like the face is it's okay. It's not massively detailed, but you can still see quite a lot of detail in there. But the dress is almost just quick brushstrokes. This is very, it's almost melting with the background. But he always gets the psychology of the person perfectly. Like you see the eyes, for me, the eyes of Ramón y Cajal, they tell you he's a scientist. He has that sort of like very sharp gaze. And obviously I had to show you his marines and the influence of photography. So these are his most recognizable paintings. They're just one part of his huge amount of work, but they're the most famous. So you can see the light. He's showing off his mastery of lights, of color, and of reflection. I mean, if you see the reflection of both the boat and the body of the child in the water that comes all the way to the foreground, you just get the rippling of the waves like that. And it's exactly what you see when you are like in the water and like the sun is sort of shimmering on the waves and you can't really see very clearly. So that shows his love for the sun and the sea of Valencia. And again, the photography, because the framing and the point of view, like the horizon here is non-existent. There's no horizon. And still, he manages to get the depth of the painting. It's just I don't know how he does it. And we see the capture of the moments. It's a very specific moment that he's capturing. And to me, this feels like your child is like playing with the boat, and you've just got into the water with the camera and just taking the photo. This is in Javea. Javea is a town that's near Valencia, but is already in the next province in Alicante, so it's to the south of Valencia. And I know Javea quite well, and this is exactly the light that it has. It's just completely like this. Like the sea is so blue that maybe you would see in other places, like for example in like Croatia or in some of the Greek islands. It's that sort of really intense blue. And this is another example where you can see the impressionistic influence. Like here, like next to the rocks, you see some of the algae. Yeah, it's on the algae and the reflections of the rocks on the water. There's a very swift, sort of fragmented brushstroke that is more impressionistic. Again, this was done in Javea, so sort of same very strong light. It's less green. The actual painting is less green. It's a bit more. It's less green on my screen than on that screen. But again, you have no horizon. And look at the angle. Like you just like it's almost like a really awkward photo that you've taken, like maybe from a rock or something. You're just trying to get the boys and the boat, and you just can't get everything in the frame. You see the reflections again of the boat, of the bodies, and if you see the change of color, like the body of the boy above the water and under the water, like it just completely changes the color. And how that makes it realistic. Like you completely believe that boy is underwater. Again, this Boys on the Beach, this is one of his most famous paintings. You see the wet skin, like he's so, with a few white brush strokes, he's completely like got it, like how the reflection of the sun on the wet skin. Again, there's no horizon. The framing, because he's left like that boy almost out of the frame. It's almost like like a spontaneous photo that you would take. And with really long brush strokes, you see here on the top right, is all this sort of dent on the sand that would be created when the waves go over and over on one place. And this boy is almost like getting sort of like under the sand there. If you wonder why all these boys are naked, it's just because in those times, like very young boys would go to the beach naked. They wouldn't wear swimsuits. Girls would at this age, but boys wouldn't. They're lucky ones that just can't do whatever they want. This is the horse's bath. Again, it's like he's cutting the horse's head like a little bit, like its ears. So again, it's like the framing is quite just a bit odd, if you like. And again, we see the light, we see the reflection on the wet skin. And this on the right, the walk along the seashore, that's his wife and his eldest daughter, Maria. And you see how older women had to go to the beach, like they had to wear. I don't know how they clean those afterwards. But again, there is no horizon, and again, it looks like a photograph. And you see a bit the same on the other one, the pink robe, which is it was painted much later in 1916. So it's a later one, but I love the way, a little bit like the one about that we saw of sewing the sail, like how the light is going through the trellis and it's just hitting the woman's robe and body, and he gets that with just the brushstrokes. So it's pretty amazing. So some critics talked about instantism, because critics love to put labels to things. They just have to make up an ism to put people to label people, because it was the capture of an instant that he takes masterfully from photography. And he was basically showing that painting could do what photography was doing, because the whole crisis of painting when photography was being developed is, well, what's the point of painting now, apart from color at that point? But he's showing that he can get that instant, he can get that moment, as well as a photographer can do, and even better in the sense that he has all the color. And like I mentioned at the start, he had, late in his life, he had some influence of avant-garde, so a bit of fauve, a bit of expressionism, so brighter colors even, not as naturalistic. So all these brush strokes, they're not, you see, they're not impressionistic, like they're very long, but they're much more, just this almost no form there, like the forms are created by the color almost, and the colors are not so naturalistic, so they're much stronger. You can still see that these women are resting under a tree, and the yellow bits are where the light is hitting the grass directly, and the greener bits is where the tree is creating a shadow, but is much less naturalistic than before. There is no clear perspective, there's almost no drawing, it's just big stains of color creating the composition. And this is the garden of his house in Madrid. He took inspiration mainly of Andalusia, also of Valencia, so lots of flowers, lots of trees, water features. There's obviously some influences of the Alhambra from Granada here. So, and again, this is a late painting, so this is 1919. So it was either before or just after he had the stroke. And again, there's much less drawing in here. It's basically stains of color. And if you want to see the garden, this is the garden. It's not exactly the same view, but it's very, very similar. Yeah, that's the same bench. So the bench that you see in the background in the painting is that bench there.
And some orange trees.
Yeah, there are some orange trees. I think he brought some from Valencia because he couldn't live without his oranges. So yeah, I wanted to show you some more photos that I don't have them on the presentation. I have them on an email that I sent to myself. These are photos that my mum took on the recent visit to the Sorolla Museum. So just some more photos of the garden. Why can't you see that? George, do you know why? Oh, okay. What? There we are. There we go. So they're not very big, but you can get an idea. I don't know if you can see them bigger than that's bigger. That's better. See, that's again the same fountain and the same bench. So that's what it looks like now. Yeah, so this obviously has an inspiration in the south of Spain, with all the mosaic, the tiles, and the artists. It sort of reminds you also of Cordoba a little bit. So yeah, so all the different areas in the garden, different corners to read, to just look at the effects of the light on the water. And yeah, this bit is just beautiful. See, all the stairs are all tiles, which reminds me also a little bit of Portugal, because Portugal has lots of this type of tiles. Okay, so let me go back to this. There we go. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, you can fire away. Thank you.
The very first one you showed, was it a self-portrait?
Yes, that was
Would you have used a mirror or?
He would have, yeah. That was a self-portrait
So
when
make it back to front, would it?
Sorry?
Would that make it back to front?
Well, yeah, I suppose that he would do it that way. Yeah. That's 1901. Yeah, that's he looks rather like my uncle in this. Doesn't he, George? He actually looks like my uncle in this. But yeah, the last one, I didn't mention this one. You see, that was one. Well, it was 1909, so it's still a few years before he died. But if you see what it says at the bottom, it says "A mi Clotilde," so to my Clotilde. So this was a portrait that he painted specifically for his wife. So you see, one thing I really like about Sorolla is just you can see from his paintings that he was painting about the things that he loved, about the sun, about the sea, and his family. He had. I didn't want to overwhelm you with too many paintings, but he has lots of portraits of his family, of his wife and his children, and he used his wife as a model so many times. So yeah.
Are there any of his paintings in this country?
I was going to say no, but I'm now having second thoughts whether there's a Sorolla in the Spanish gallery in Bishop Auckland, because I'm trying to remember, and I'm not sure. I don't think so, but my memory might fail me.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Most of his paintings are in Spain, like they're in the two Sorolla museums, so in Madrid and Valencia. Then some of them are in the Museum of Fine Arts in Valencia as well. And I think there was one that was in Bilbao, one that was in Asturias, so a few that are just dotted around. Yes. And then in the Hispanic Society. So really need to go there. And at least I've seen the vision of Spain during the big exhibition, but I would love to go to the Hispanic Society and see just the whole complex, the whole building. So I think we have two keen researchers looking for Sorolla's paintings in the UK.
I'll find one.
Rose will find one. If there is one, she will find it.
Give me the option and I'll find it.
So is the Spanish Society then open to the public or not?
Yes, as far as I know, yes. Yeah.
So like his museum?
Yeah. yeah. So it's I think it's a museum, it's a library, and it's like a research center, which is what Huntington wanted it to be. Like, when I was doing this research, I was half deciding that if I ever do a PhD, I'm going to do it on Huntington, because that man, honestly, like, his life was so intense. He went to Spain several times to learn about the customs, to learn about history, and he went, I think, to the Middle East as well. So he was very well traveled. But I mean, the fact that he had 2,000 books on Spanish art and culture by the age of 20 sort of blew up my mind. I was like, what am I doing with my life? I mean, this man was like an expert in Spanish culture by the age of 20. It's incredible. Like, yeah, he's really, really interesting guy.
Did Sorolla travel much to Paris?
He went a few times, yeah, to the international exhibitions. Let me go back to one of the first slides, this one. Yeah, so his first solo exhibitions were, 1906, 1908 in Paris and in London.
Yep.
So, but he had already been to Paris before, when he had that big triumph in the international exhibitions with these two paintings, with this one, with the Return from Fishing. That is now, this one, for example, is in the Musée d'Orsay. So there's some of them of him also in France, and this one, the Sad Inheritance. This one sadly is in a private collection. So I saw it, I think, in the exhibition together with the ones from the Hispanic Society. I'm sure this one was there as well. And it's a massive painting as well. It's really big, and it's really impressive, really moving as well, which was the intention. So yeah. I now have a doubt. Can you tell from that habit? Are they Jesuits, do you think?
No, we can't tell from behind.
No, I don't know. I thought they were Jesuits, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
He has a hood on his cassock.
Hmm?
He has a hood on his cassock.
He has a hood on his cassock.
Oh, so it's a religious, not a Jesuit then.
It's a religious, yeah. So yeah,
Benedictines, perhaps.
maybe.
I can't tell from here. Has he got a belt?
Yes.
He does,
Oh,
yeah.
Benedictine.
Benedictine, yeah. The belt is
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Was he religious?
Yes, he was. I'm not sure of his sort of inner life. I mean, 19th century Spain at that time, like everyone was religious. Like, it's not like now that Spain is not a Catholic country anymore. But at that time it was a Catholic country, and everyone was at least outwardly religious. I think he was, but from what I've read, he didn't consider himself too devout. But I don't really know what that means, because that might have been his perception of himself as well. Maybe he was also being too hard on himself, really, because when he had the big failure with the Atonement of Christ, that threw him into a crisis, I think, a faith crisis, in the sense of, if I've painted this and people say that is too human and there's no divinity here, does that mean I'm not devout enough? Maybe I'm not devout enough. So I think that made him doubt his belief, but maybe his devotion a little bit. But he was like, he would go to mass regularly, and with his family, and I think with his children he hoped that they would, but he wasn't. Maybe he was a bit more liberal than other parents. He sort of let them a bit more free in that sense, that to decide. But he definitely brought them up as Catholics. So yeah.